What is urinary incontinence? How common is it, and what can be done about it?
So you have a pelvic floor, and the pelvic floor supports the uterus, the bladder, and the rectum. And as we get older, or as a result of childbirth, you can start to lose, there can be weakness of the pelvic floor. And when there's weakness of the pelvic floor, there can be loss of support. Urinary incontinence is there's a couple different types of urinary incontinence, but stress urinary incontinence is related to the fact that you don't have that support. So whenever you cough, sneeze, walk up steps, laugh, try to exercise, you can have loss of urine, which is different from urge incontinence. Urge incontinence is like that commercial that you heard, when I gotta go, I gotta go. That's urge incontinence, which is different from stress incontinence. Stress incontinence, when you cough, sneeze, and then you have some leakage. The treatment for the two are very different. And so part of the thing that women need to do is they need to go in and have an evaluation to determine which type of incontinence do I have, or do I have a combination of the two, and then address that. But that being said, all women should try to strengthen their pelvic floor. It doesn't matter what age you are. A strong pelvic floor will help with sexual enjoyment. A strong pelvic floor is needed after delivery, because that whole second stage of labor, when the baby is fully dilated and the baby's coming through, those muscles are being stretched and pushed apart to allow for the egress of the baby. So postpartum, you need to work on strengthening your pelvic floor. And when you get older, you need to work. So there's never an age when a woman doesn't need to work on strengthening her pelvic floor. The problem is, a lot of times you don't know how to do that. And it's hard to figure out exactly where is your pelvic floor. I mean, you can't see it, you can't really touch it. Hard to discern. It's not your abdominal muscles, it's not your gluteal muscles, pelvic floor muscles. The one thing that women can do, that's a test to see if they can identify their pelvic floor muscles, is if they can stop the flow of urine. If they can stop the flow of urine, then they are contracting their pelvic floor muscles. Those are the only muscles that can do that. So that's the test. I don't recommend that you do this all the time, but that's the test to know, have you identified the right muscles? And then there are all sorts of devices that you can use that can help you to strengthen your pelvic floor, but it's definitely something that women need to pay attention to. And I would say it's something that gynecologists usually don't discuss with women enough. Usually we only start discussing it either after childbirth, momentarily, or when she comes into the office complaining of incontinence. And there have been studies that showed that when it's early incontinence, we're just starting, that doing these type of exercises, you may have heard of Kegel exercises, help.
Thank you. What kind of gut problems do people come to you with? What causes gut problems, and what is the solution?
Yes, that might be for me. So, gut problems are pretty prevalent in general. And I think one of the disappointing things I've found in the medical world is that it's not addressed even in gastrointestinal doctors' visits, how food impacts gastrointestinal health. It's always shocking to me when a gastroenterologist will say, oh, food's not important. I go, but that's the only thing in physical contact with your gut. Of course it's important, right? And we do know that that's an important component. So I think some level of gut issue is pretty dominant in people in general. There are some people who think that our gut health is the key to the health of things like our immune system. I'm very hesitant to say cause and effect on anything, because I find that when we talk about conclusions versus results, we usually get led astray. My husband and I were just having this conversation before I came on, that if people would read a study and just read the results instead of the discussion and conclusion, they'd be better off, because the discussion and conclusion takes you the wrong way. So oftentimes you'll see ideas like leaky gut associated with autoimmune, but did they develop autoimmune and leaky gut at the same time, or did one cause the other? I don't think that matters. We work on both things. So I found when people eat really optimized plant-based diet, especially when we work with people on hypernourishment and plant-based diet, what we find is that gut health gets better. Sometimes though, they feel more symptoms at first because again, if they're not used to fiber, suddenly that's a very new thing and that could cause all sorts of problems, gas and bloating, some constipation if their gut's weak, or some will be going multiple times a day, which I actually don't mind as long as it's out, it's out. But those are the most common things we see is people complaining of bloatiness, gassiness, and worry about the looks of their stool. I wish we could cancel whoever created the meme that says like what poop's supposed to look like. I have not found it to be the case that poop needs to look a certain way in order for someone to be healthy. It looks differently depending on what you ate. If you drank smoothies all day, you're gonna have green mushy stuff come out, you know, it's gonna be very different, but that doesn't really matter. What matters is the internal health of your body. But that's what I see people most focused on. I have helped people reverse anything from IBS, both like irritable bowel symptoms, which we work on a combination of mood and diet for those folks because anxiety is a huge component for most folks with irritable bowel. And then for inflammatory bowel diseases like ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, those folks present differently. Oftentimes they have blood in the stool. They can have terrible constipation or terrible diarrhea. It just depends on the person. And in those cases, I have to work with them to get their gut healthy enough to then be able to give them the nourishment they need to reverse those diseases.
And also, we talk about the microbiome of the gut, but there's bacteria in the vagina, and that's a normal thing. And a lot of times you can control the vaginitis, the bacterial vaginosis, the yeast by controlling your diet.
Oh, there's one other thing I wanted to add too. Most common problem that people, a very common problem that people use a lot of pharmaceuticals for is constipation. And the primary cause of constipation is not enough fiber and not enough water. Right. And a lot of times I've helped people who've had constipation for 20 years or more who have had to have surgeries because of rectal injuries from constipation. And no doctor before me ever asked them how much water they drank. And we just add the water intake. And those of you who see me on stage, you know, I actually act out what it's like to go down a dry water slide. You know, that's just, oh, it's very hard to get down, right? You need to like lubricate that slide. And when people get their water intake up, they're able to have normal bowel movements and they never knew that before. So water intake is important. And by the way, the other thing that dehydration causes is constipation, fatigue, and headaches. Think about how much money people spend on caffeine and medicine for headaches and medicines for constipation when water intake was their main problem.